visit to a city called Celebration. You may have been there. It's right next to Disney World, and it's literally built by the Disney company as their image of the perfect American community. So my friends and I go there for lunch, and we go to this Thai restaurant. I get pad Thai, which I shouldn't because it's full of carbs. And I'm eating this and thinking, I have never had Asian food this bland in my entire life. And you know when you get a dish and you can tell that the number of shrimp in it have been counted out exactly, and that everybody's getting 6. I mean, everybody. It's not like they're cooking with joy back there. It's not the Food Network. And I'm eating all this and thinking, as I look for metaphors everywhere, my pad Thai is a metaphor for celebration. This community looks like a regular town. It has a Starbucks. It has too few parking spaces. It has businesses, townhouses, and suburban kind of developments. But everything is so brand new, spotlessly clean. It's just like my pad Thai. It's totally bland, and it's mathematically defined. It looks like the whole city has been airlifted in the night before your visit and dropped in place by giant helicopters, or like it's a movie set and all of the fronts are held up by 2x4s at an angle, and as soon as you leave, they're going to strike the whole thing and put it on big trucks and drive it away because the shoot is over. Everything is exactly the same age. No building is any older looking than any other building. I turned to my friend and I said, this is creeping me out. I feel like I'm having lunch with the Stepford Wives, or like it's Pleasantville, or the Truman Show, or some unreality, like fake world. And I realized this is because of the influence of Berkeley. Our life here is filled with this kind of gritty urban reality times of Research One University. We're bristling with history and tradition and baggage and all kinds of other stuff. And when I go to Celebration, it's a community that's been created to escape all of that, to live above it on this kind of styrofoam world where you don't have to really worry about any of that kind of stuff. And the phrase that came to my mind was radical discontinuity. You know, Celebration is radically discontinuous with a town like Berkeley, and I could feel the tension of that sitting there over my pad Thai. And this says when Jesus calls a person, what he's calling that person to. He's calling us to radical discontinuity with how we lived and what we were before. Today we're going to visit Luke chapter 5, where he calls a man named Peter to this new radical discontinuity. He calls him, if you will, out of Celebration and into Berkeley. This is part of our series of talks called the Jesus Album, and the point of these is to find Jesus, to identify him in snapshots of his life and career in Luke's account of what he did in the first century of Roman-occupied Palestine, and through those snapshots to access him, to give him more access to us so that we can hear his call in our lives more clearly and find the direction for that call more directly. We drop into this story in the 5th chapter, and Jesus is on a teaching tour of Galilee, the northern part of Palestine. He's walking along the area on the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee, probably near the city of Capernaum that was his headquarters city. And as he is doing this tour, his career has gone viral. In other words, he starts out as a kind of an unknown kid from a town called Nazareth with baggage in his past. He's a carpenter's son, then he's a rabbi who gains some prominence. Then he starts doing this supernatural miracle stuff, and suddenly his career just explodes. Now, that doesn't sound like much today because we live in a celebrity culture. But to become a celebrity in the ancient world was almost impossible because there was no technology for communication. It's not like Justin Bieber on YouTube blowing up into a megastar and being on the Grammys. It was almost undoable. So when Luke records that huge masses are coming to see Jesus, this is probably, these people hadn't seen this ever happen before until John the Baptist, because there were just not many famous people around that average people could have access to. And they're pressing in to hear his teaching. He talks about in verse number 1, and probably they're thinking that maybe he'll do some miracles for them, and they can see that. And so Jesus, being right on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he sees that there are too many people really to talk to, and they are so numerous that there's no way the people in the back are going to be able to hear. So it's just a simple practical problem. And the way he solves that is he spots a couple of fishing boats that are empty, because the fishing all takes place at night, and being daytime, the fishermen are at the end of their shift, so to speak. They all work third shift, and they're washing their nets so that they're ready to go for the next night of fishing. And this leaving the boat empty, he approaches a man who lives in the area named Peter, someone who, if you put all the gospel accounts together, he's probably connected with about 3 times up to this point. And he asks Peter if he can borrow the boat for a little while, and will he take him a little ways out into the water, and this will allow him to use the boat as a kind of floating pulpit, if you will. The idea is he'll sit in the boat, and the shoreline of the sea area forms a kind of natural amphitheater, and it would be easy to be heard by hundreds or maybe even thousands of people if you're doing it from this boat. This may be the first application of communication technology to the sharing of the good news. I think this boat is version 1 of gospel hardware. It's not an iPod, but it's a piece of technology being used to get the message across, and so it's kind of a precedent-setting sort of a thing. You know, people say, well, why do you get together on Sunday mornings like this? This hotel conference room is a fishing boat. Now, I'm just standing out on the side about doing this. Nobody hears me, but this is kind of our boat. This is our amphitheater, one of them, for sharing the good news about Jesus with people. Now, the other advantage of being on a boat is you have a captive audience with whoever is there with you. My father-in-law, Dale, used to go fishing with me quite a bit, and he particularly enjoyed this dimension of the experience. Because once we're out in his cheesy 10-foot aluminum rowboat, generally with me doing all the rowing, and we're headed down the Apple River in Wisconsin, he begins to regale me with his fishing stories from the era of the Korean War. I'm rowing, and he's saying, yeah, my friend Merle McKinney used to go just around the bend of the river, and he'd get a largemouth bass on every cast, and we'd pull them in, and they would be, you know, 4 feet long, and we'd fry them. We'd have so much left over. We'd have to freeze them to keep from wasting the fish. Just unbelievable. He could drop a nickel in the river, and the trout would jump out right into his creel. And I'm just, I'm suffering in my soul because the temptation with a captive audience, it's just too great. It's too much for him. And this would actually be the largest part of the afternoon, would be him sharing all this. And Jesus recognizes this advantage, and he knows that Peter is there and is listening to him share and in full view of everybody. Peter's probably feeling pretty good. You're the guy running the boat that the most famous man in the known area at the time is teaching from. It's like being Justin Bieber's DJ or something. That's pretty good staff work to be involved in, and it's kind of the way the call to follow Jesus seems at first. At first it seems like it's just becoming part of his fan base. At first it seems like it's just the talking part, it's just the teachings of Jesus. And so to follow him at a kind of a first level, it's almost like following someone on Twitter. It's as if Jesus is asking us to just subscribe to his content, and that following him is becoming a kind of lifetime podcast consumer. And if I can just absorb all this content with the white wires in my ears or wherever I do it, following these words, then somehow I'm following the person who has produced them. In the same way, if I listen to a certain artist's music, I'm a fan of Usher or whoever it is. It's a Twitter model of what followership means. And as long as the words are in me all the time, then that must pretty much be the deal. This may be what Peter's thinking at this point. This is great. When my mother-in-law gets sick, this guy makes her better. When he needs a boat, I become the hero of the situation. And really, all I have to do, as I did with Dale, is be the captive audience for just a little while. I'll go back to washing the nets, and tonight we're fishing again. It's fantastic. I love this Jesus guy. It couldn't be better than following him. But you know, in many years of speaking and preaching sermons, what I've learned is that the favorite thing about sermons that people like is the end. And so the end of Jesus' sermon arrives, and we jump into the story in Luke chapter 5, verse number 4. And when he had finished speaking, this is always popular with people when you finish speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, this is a whine. You have to read this whiny. "We toiled all night and took nothing. But at your word, I will let down the nets." The word "let down" there in the original language is plural, so there's more than one person in the boat with him at this time. And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. Fishing was a pretty good job in the ancient world. You earned an above average income, but it was very high in terms of labor costs and equipment, and so lots of people did it as a co-op, or families worked together to spread out the overhead, so to speak, and that's exactly what's taking place here. Peter is a partner with the family of a man named Zebedee, and they are in this all together. That's why you've got the two boats here. And as Jesus comes to the end of his teaching, what Peter is now finding out is this isn't just a matter of words that I listen to or content that I absorb. There are actions that are required here. I don't really condone. My wife Jan and I lived for many years in the state of Maine, very close to professional fishing and lobstering culture. And we got to know people who were in this industry. Many of them lobstering, some of them fishing for tuna, spotting it from small aircraft flying over the Atlantic, and then tracking down huge tuna swimming near the surface and harpooning them, like in Moby Dick, from a big speedboat, 900-pound fish. And you learn a lot when you cross these cultural lines. And what we discovered was these cultures are very insular, and they do not take coaching from the outside. And I'm thinking, as Peter hears this from Jesus, with all the respect he has for this rabbi and this man who has done these wonderful miracles that he's observed on more than one occasion, he's probably thinking in the back of his mind, you know, in the religion department, we all look to you. But in the fishing department, that's me. So when you tell me to go out to fish, you probably don't even know where fish come from because you've spent your career building furniture, not fishing. That's exactly the way that people in the subcultures that we met would have responded to a request like this. It's just, you don't do it. I mean, it's culturally wildly inappropriate. But after the healing of his mother-in-law and the other supernatural things Peter has seen, he goes, okay, and they push out into the deep. The fish are at much lower depths during the day because the temperature's higher. This is a tropical part of the world. It's well below sea level. That means the nets have to go way, way down. It's a big hassle. It's a ton of work. And Peter is absolutely sure that nothing is going to come of it, but he will obey. Now, at this level, the call to follow Jesus is obedience school. Like the people in town who spend thousands of dollars to send their dogs to schools where they learn all these dog skills. And after the writing of these massive checks, your Chihuahua can come home and make a BLT on whole wheat. I mean, the phenomenal, unbelievable. Have you met? We have some dogs like this in our neighborhood, where the master will just give the dog a gesture or a look or snap his fingers or something like that, and the dog will roll over 3 times and sing the national anthem. I mean, what they're able to do is just, it's really quite extraordinary. I've seen the results of it. Now, people who don't have the resources to send their dogs to obedience school use simpler solutions that you get from infomercials on satellite television. These are what amount to tasers built into dog collars, and if the dog crosses the line and leaves your backyard, it goes like that. And this B.F. Skinner would love this. This is conditioning. And others will use things like electronic barriers that silently will release an ultrasonic tone that humans can't hear, but dogs receive as torturous, which will drive the dog crazy until it goes back behind the electronic line, and they are essentially beaten into submission. At this point, the call to follow Jesus sounds like compliance. You know, I'm recognizing maybe that it isn't just listening to words or subscribing to content. I have to comply with certain behaviors. I've got to push the boat out. I've got to go do that whole Christian thing. I have to go fishing when I don't want to. I've got to be involved in this. I have to be at that meeting, do this kind of thing, give my money here, do that with my time. I have to stop this. I can't swear anymore. I mean, I can't drink beer. I can't smoke pot. Blah 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 blah. What Jesus really wants from me is to obey. Bad dog. And he has high-end ways of securing obedience. Like the pastor shows a funny video in his sermon and this, oh yes, I won't smoke pot anymore. And he has low-end ways of securing obedience, like having your soul crushed by the condemnation of a group of people who don't approve of your lifestyle. But it all comes down to the same thing, that following is obey. It's compliance. It's behavior. Bad dog. And I'm thinking if I'm in Peter's shoes and in his boat, I'm probably in about that mood right now. I've just had the shock alarm go off in my collar, and I have complied, and I'm now floating out into the Sea of Galilee. He and his friends lower the nets into the water, and a huge shoal of fish rush into these nets, and they pull them up into the boats to the point where the first boat starts to sink, and he has called out to his partners in the co-op to get the second boat out to carry the abundance of fish, and even that one begins to go under. Whoa, baby. And the story picks up in verse 8. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken, and so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, those were his partners, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men." And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. When Peter sees that Jesus' plan actually works out, his phrase here is unusual. He falls at his knees. It means he falls down before his feet and he says, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man." And what he's recognizing is that he has missed the mark. And that's what the original word for sinful here means. Peter's finally realized that there is something to aim at. And you don't know that you're a mark misser until you realize there's a target. It's the presence of Jesus in his life that has made it possible for him to understand the distance between where he is as a person and who God is. The distance between how he could be living and the way he actually is living. Because until there is that target point, there is no such concept as missing the mark. And as soon as he realizes that, he's able to say, "Look what I've done. Look what I've been. I've complied, but I haven't complied out of a heart that loves you. I've complied because I'm afraid. I've complied because you're so much more powerful than I am. Because you could just crush me like a bug. I've just gone along." Bad dog. And at this point, realizing who Jesus is going to become in his life, he humbles himself before him and says, "You should just turn your back and leave me out here." And at that, the Lord's able to say, "That's not how it's going to be. This isn't about you being afraid. Bad dog. This is about you following. This is about you loving me enough to want to become like me. This is about you taking a trip to a radically discontinuous place and recognizing that the path between where you are, celebration, and where you're going, Berkeley, is following." that leads this man to leave everything, which includes the big pile of fish he just caught, and follow Jesus. Following him isn't just listening. Listening's involved. It's not just obeying. Obedience is involved. It's leaving and pursuing him. If I'm leaving and pursuing him, I'm going to end up in a discontinuous place. A place that is not just the Christian extension of my current life, but is a different way of living. If I'm not at least headed towards a discontinuous place, I have to ask myself if I'm following. Because that's where it's going to go every single time. Let's pause right here, and we'll invite our band to come back and lead us in some worship. Take a couple of minutes to just think and reflect a little bit on what we've discussed today.